The drone had been sitting dead in open space near the edge of the Venn system, and the Coalition had sent a mixed crew to bring it back. Simple work. Safe work. The kind of mission that gets filed and forgotten. Nobody expected the Vortai to be waiting inside the debris field. Nobody expected 16 of their boarding craft to hit the Resolute on 3 sides at once. Now the corridors smelled like burnt metal, and the emergency lights were bleeding red across every wall. Priel had not trained for combat. She was a junior analyst, barely 2 cycles out of the academy, and her job on this ship was to study data, not watch soldiers die. But her monitoring station gave her a full view of every crew member's biometric feed, and right now she could not look away. The alien soldiers, Thelari, Feloni, 2 Durak, were doing exactly what their training said to do. They had engaged hard in the first hour, pushed the Vortai back from the main deck, and now their bodies were telling them the truth. Fatigue signals rising, pain markers crossing yellow into orange, energy reserves dropping. The Coalition had a rule built into every soldier's armor. When your physical reserve dropped below 40%, you signaled for relief. You pulled back. You let someone else hold the line. It was not weakness. It was biology. Every species in the galaxy had limits. You respected them or you died from ignoring them. The Thelari soldiers were signaling now. One by one, the alien fighters were stepping back, finding cover, slowing their fire. Jan, one of the frontline Thelari, had his back against a damaged bulkhead and was breathing in long, controlled pulls. He had done his part. The system said so. Priel was watching all of this when something on the far side of her display caught her attention. 8 small dots, the human soldiers. She had almost forgotten about them. 8 soldiers from a species the Coalition had only formally recognized 12 years ago. A trial program. Most senior officers called them a political decision. Priel pulled up their feeds and went very still. The pain markers for every human soldier were not orange. They were red, solid red. Some of them had been red for over an hour. Private Ren Akafer's exhaustion index was nearly double the standard relief threshold. Sergeant Dara Knowles had a pressure reading across her chest that suggested cracked ribs or something close to it. The biometric system was flashing soft alerts on all 8 of them, quiet warnings that said these bodies needed rest. None of them were resting. They were moving faster. Priel switched to the corridor camera feed. She watched Dara lead her unit through a section of the ship the Thelari had already cleared and abandoned. The humans were not holding position. They were pushing deeper. Their movements were not frantic or rushed. They were deliberate, controlled. Dara moved like someone who had decided something and was now simply doing it. Priel opened a channel to Commander Vas Ural. Vas was the senior officer on the Resolute, 4-armed, tall even by Thelari standards, with the kind of face that had spent decades learning not to show anything. He came on the channel without urgency. He was managing 3 things at once. "Commander," Priel said carefully, "the human unit. Their fatigue and pain signals are critical. According to every standard we have, they should be stopping." Vas looked at the feed she sent him. He was quiet for a moment. "They are aware of their readings?" he asked. "Their suits would be alerting them, yes, the same way ours do." Another pause. On the camera feed, Dara's unit had reached the junction of the 2nd and 3rd corridors. The Vortai were there in number. Any rational calculation said 8 bodies in that condition had no business going forward. Vas watched them go forward. "Has their unit leader acknowledged the alerts?" he asked. Priel checked. "The system shows acknowledgement 3 times in the last 40 minutes. She is receiving the warnings, sir." Vas said nothing. He kept watching the feed. His expression did not change, but one of his lower hands, the ones he usually kept still, moved slowly to the edge of the console and held it. Down in the 3rd corridor, the Vortai had broken through the last defensive barrier the alien soldiers had set before pulling back. It was a wide section of the ship, near the cargo transfer bay, with high ceilings and bad cover. The kind of place where numbers mattered more than tactics. The Thelari who had been holding it were gone, properly gone, in the way the manual said, in the way the biology demanded. The Vortai moved in with the confidence of a force that expected empty space. What they found instead was 8 humans coming the other way. Priel watched on the camera feed. She watched Dara walk point, weapon up, not running, just moving with that same terrible steadiness. She watched Ren behind her, then Briggs, then the others. 8 people who by every number on Priel's screen should have been in a medical bay. The Vortai opened fire. The humans did not stop. They spread into the corridor, found angles, returned fire, and kept moving forward. One took a hit to the arm and switched hands. Another stumbled, caught himself on the wall, and kept going. There was no hesitation between the hit and the continuation. It was as if the pain signal was received and then simply set aside, filed somewhere that was not in charge of the legs. Priel realized she had been holding her breath. She looked at the biometric feeds. She looked at the camera, back at the feeds. Every reading said these people should be stopping. Not one of them was stopping. 6 hours into the fight, the GCS Resolute had a new problem. It was not the Vortai, who were still pressing hard through the lower corridors. It was not the damage to the ship, which was serious but manageable. The new problem was sitting in Priel's data feed, glowing red, and refusing to make sense. The human soldiers were still going. Priel had spent the last 2 hours pulling every file the Coalition database had on human biology. She had read about their planet, a dense, high-gravity world with extreme temperature ranges and an ecosystem that had spent millions of years trying to kill everything that lived in it. She had read the initial contact reports, the medical summaries, the physiological comparisons. Humans were not the strongest species in the Coalition. They were not the fastest. Their senses were average at best. But one line in the earliest contact report had stayed with her. Pain receptor density, significantly above galactic average. Humans felt more pain than most species, not less, more. And yet Ren Akafer was currently moving through Corridor 7 with a plasma burn on his right shoulder that the suit's medical scanner classified as a Grade 3 injury. He had been hit 20 minutes ago. His pain feed had spiked hard, she had seen it herself, and then something strange had happened. The spike had not gone away, but Ren had shifted his weapon to his left hand, taken one breath, and kept walking. The pain was still there. The readings confirmed it. He was simply not letting it make decisions for him. Priel did not have a category for this. Commander Voss had tried. 40 minutes ago he had opened a channel to Sergeant Dara Knowles and given a direct order: fall back, rest, let the Durac Reserve Unit take the corridor. It was a reasonable order. It was the only rational order given the biometric data. Dara had acknowledged it clearly. Priel had heard her voice come through calm and professional. Copy that, Commander. And then she had continued forward. Voss had pressed. He had used formal command language, the kind that did not leave room for interpretation. Dara's response had been short. We'll rest when the corridor is clear, sir. Voss had stood at his console for a long moment after that, all 4 arms still, and then he had said nothing and gone back to managing the rest of the ship. In Corridor 4, Jan was pressed into a doorway while a human soldier named Briggs stood in the open hallway and laid down cover fire. This was not a thing Jan would have done. A Thelari soldier in Briggs's condition, suit damage on the left side, a reading that suggested bruised or possibly cracked something in the ribcage, would have been in a support role, not a forward one. Briggs was not in a support role. Briggs was standing in an open corridor, taking fire and giving Jan time to move. Jan moved. He got to the next position safely. He looked back at Briggs, who was already following, already scanning ahead, already focused on the next 10 meters. They fight, Jan said quietly, to no one in particular, like they forgot they are allowed to stop. Nobody answered him. There was nobody to answer. Priel was still at her monitoring station when the second Vortai wave hit. She saw it on the long-range feed first, more boarding craft, larger than the first group, coming in from the dark side of the debris field. She ran the numbers fast, the way Voss had taught her. The alien soldiers who were still active had reserves left, but not much. The Durac pair were down to 22%. The remaining Thelari fighters were between 30 and 35, below the threshold, at the threshold, finished by any standard measure. She switched to the human feeds. Dara's unit had just cleared the engine corridor, the most critical section of the ship, the one whose loss would have ended the fight an hour ago. They had held it alone for over 3 hours. Every single one of them was showing readings that Priel's system was flagging as requiring immediate medical attention. Wren's shoulder, Briggs's side. A human named Osa had a head injury that the scanner could not fully assess because he had not stopped moving long enough for it to complete the reading. Priel looked at Commander Voss. He was staring at the incoming wave data, doing what he always did, calculating, running the shapes of the fight through his mind, looking for the path that cost the least and saved the most. She had watched him do this before. He was very good at it. She watched his expression now. She watched him reach the end of the calculation. She saw what it looked like when Voss ran the numbers and did not like the answer. He pulled up a separate screen. Quietly, without announcing it to anyone, he began opening the file for Coalition Emergency Surrender Protocol. It was not a decision yet. It was a preparation. The kind of thing a careful commander did when the math was moving in one direction. Priel looked back at the human feed. Dara Knowles was at the far end of the engine corridor. The second Vorti wave would hit the outer hull in less than 4 minutes. The alien soldiers were spent. The ship was damaged. The numbers said what they said. Dara was checking her weapon, counting ammunition, looking at the corridor ahead. Priel watched her. Voss watched her. Dara was reloading. By hour 9, Commander Voss had stopped trying to explain it and started trying to understand it. The second Vorti wave had hit the outer hull hard. 2 more boarding points, more bodies in the corridors. The alien soldiers had done what they could: short bursts, defensive positions, careful use of what little they had left. The Durac pair had collapsed into medical rest an hour ago. The Thelari fighters were down to guarding the command deck, which was all their bodies would allow. The ship was holding, but only barely, and only because the engine corridor had not fallen. The engine corridor had not fallen because the humans were in it. Voss had watched the numbers for hours. He was a precise being. He did not guess. He calculated. He had fought in 4 wars across 30 years of service, and he had a mind that processed battlefield data the way most species processed breathing, automatically, constantly, without effort. He ran the numbers on the human unit over and over and kept arriving at the same result. They should have stopped. Not tactically stopped. Not strategically stopped. Biologically stopped. The kind of stop that a body enforces on its own regardless of what the mind wants. Every sentient species the Thelari had ever catalogued had this mechanism. It was not a choice. When tissue damage reached a certain point, when fatigue accumulated past a certain line, the organism shut itself down. It was a survival feature. You could fight it for a short time with enough will or chemical help, but the body always won. That was simply how life worked. Voss opened a private channel to Dara Knowles. She answered quickly. No delay, no breathlessness in her voice, just present. "Sergeant Knowles," Voss said, "your pain readings have been critical for 6 hours. Your entire unit is injured. I need to understand what is keeping you moving." There was a short pause. Not hesitation, more like she was considering how to say something that was obvious to her. "The job isn't done, sir," she said. Voss was quiet for a moment. "That is not a biological answer." "No, sir," she said almost gently, "it isn't." He closed the channel. He stood at his console and thought about that for a long time. On the other side of the command deck, Priel had been digging through historical records for the last 2 hours. She had found something that was making her uncomfortable in a way she could not yet name. There were fragmented reports from old border conflicts, minor skirmishes from before the formal coalition contact with Earth, filed by species who had encountered humans and not known what they were. The reports came from different sources, different species, different star systems. But the language in them repeated, would not yield, continued past all expectation, did not respond to standard surrender signals, sustained injuries that should have ended their ability to fight and continued fighting. One report from a Vorti patrol, she noted this with particular interest, had described a single human soldier holding a narrow passage against 6 of their fighters for nearly an hour before other humans arrived. The patrol's assessment at the end read, "We believed it was a weapon of some kind. We did not understand it was simply a soldier." Priel read that line 3 times. Down in the engine corridor, the Vorti had been attempting to push through for 4 hours. They had the numbers, they had the firepower. What they did not have was any experience fighting something that did not respond the way things were supposed to respond. Their tactics were built on a foundation that every species shared: push hard enough, cause enough pain, create enough danger, and the enemy will seek safety. It was universal. It was reliable. It had always worked. It was not working. The Vorti field commander sent a signal, not to his own units, not an attack order. He directed it at the human unit's communication frequency, an unusual move, a query signal, the kind used when you wanted to ask something instead of shoot something. The message was simple, 4 words in translated coalition standard: "What are you?" Dara received it. Priel saw the acknowledgement register in the suit data. Dara had heard it. She understood it. She did not answer. She moved to the next position in the corridor, checked the angle, and waved 2 of her unit forward. The Vorti commander waited. No answer came. He sent the signal again. Again, nothing. What happened next took Priel a few minutes to fully register on her feeds. The Vorti in the engine corridor had stopped pushing forward. Not because they had been beaten back. The humans had not broken their line. Not because they had taken too many casualties. Their numbers were still strong. They had stopped because something in their tactical system had reached a conclusion that their training had not prepared a word for. The things in the corridor ahead had no visible stop point, no threshold the Vorti knew how to reach. They had tried pain. They had tried numbers. They had tried time, and time was working against them now because the things in the corridor just kept getting harder to move the longer the fight went on. The Vorti did not retreat fully. Not yet, but they pulled back from the 3rd deck. They held their positions outside it and they went quiet. Priel looked at the movement data, then she looked at Voss. Voss was looking at it too. One of his lower hands was very slowly closing into a fist at his side, not from anger, from something else, something that looked on a Thelari face a little like awe. The Vorti had just been frightened away from a corridor by 8 injured humans who refused to stop. And the humans had not even noticed. At hour 11, the Vorti were gone. They had pulled back fully from the Resolute, all boarding units, all corridor fighters, every last one. The ship's external sensors confirmed it. The sounds of weapons fire faded corridor by corridor until the only noise left was the hum of damaged systems and the soft footsteps of crew members beginning to move again. The alien soldiers started the process they all knew well. Eat something, drink something, sit down, let the body begin its repair. The Thelari fighters found corners and lowered themselves carefully to the floor. The Durak pair were already deep in meditative rest, their 6 eyes closed, breathing in the slow pattern that their species used to recover. The ship's medical bay filled up steadily, beings helping each other in, holding doors, speaking in low voices. It was a quiet, practiced thing. Every species had a version of it. The battle ends. The body reclaims its needs. You give it what it asks for. Priel was watching the humans. The 8 of them had come out of the engine corridor and done something she had not expected. They had helped. Without being asked, without ceremony, they had started carrying the alien wounded to the medical bay. Jan, whose legs had finally given out near the end of the fight, found himself lifted, carefully, without fuss, by a human named Osai, who had a head bandage that was visibly soaked through. Osai said nothing. He just walked Jan to the bay, set him down gently, and went back for someone else. Then the humans sat down in the corridor outside the medical bay. They leaned against the wall, shoulder to shoulder, weapons laid across their knees. 5 of them had visible injuries. All 8 of them had readings that Priel's system still had not stopped flagging, and they were laughing. Ren had his arm in a field sling, and he was laughing at something Briggs had said. Briggs was grinning. Dara had her head back against the wall and her eyes half closed, and there was a small, tired smile on her face. They sounded like people who had just finished something hard and were glad to have finished it. They sounded like people at the end of a long day of work, not the end of 11 hours of combat. Priel did not know what to do with this. The ship's doctor was a felony, small, 6-limbed, with soft gray fur and large, careful eyes. Her name was Sovi. She had been in medicine for 40 years and had treated injuries from a dozen species. When Dara came into the bay, Sovi did her examination quietly, cataloging everything with the focus of someone who had learned long ago not to react to what she found. 3 lacerations on the left arm, 2 cracked ribs, a hairline fracture in the left hand, bruising across both shoulders consistent with repeated impact. Sovi looked at her instruments, then she looked at Dara. "You fought like this for 11 hours, she said. "Yes," Dara said. "You knew you were injured?" "Yes." Sovi was quiet for a moment. "Did it slow you down?" Dara thought about this honestly. "A little," she said. "Not enough to matter." Sovi said very quietly, "I see." She kept working. But her hands had slowed slightly, and she did not look at her instruments for a while after that. Commander Voss called the debrief 2 hours later. He gathered the senior crew in the main meeting room, and the human unit came in last, most of them still bandaged and moving carefully. Voss did not open with tactics. He did not review the battle sequence or assign credit or analyze mistakes. He looked at the humans across the table and asked the only question he actually had. "I need you to explain what I watched today." The humans looked at each other. Ren scratched the back of his neck. Briggs studied the table. It seemed to be difficult not because they were hiding something, but because they had never been asked to put it into words before. Dara spoke first. "When the job needs doing and your people are in danger," she said, "you don't think about stopping. You think about what needs to happen next. That's all." Jan was sitting across from her. His legs were wrapped and he had been told not to put weight on them for 2 days. He leaned forward anyway. "But your body was failing," he said. "Every reading said so." Ren looked at him. "Bodies fail," he said. "You just work with what you've got." The room was quiet after that. Priel had her writing pad open. She had been taking notes since before the debrief started. She looked at what she had written and then stopped writing for a moment, because she needed to think about something she was only now beginning to understand. The alien crew had spent the whole day being unsettled by the humans, looking at them sideways, flagging their readings as errors, treating them as something slightly wrong, slightly broken, slightly dangerous in a way that was hard to define. But now, in this room, Priel watched Jan look at Dara with an expression she recognized. She had seen it before, usually between senior Thelari soldiers who had served together for a long time. It was the look of someone deciding, quietly and without announcement, that the person across from them was someone they would stand next to. It was trust, careful and new and still finding its shape, but there. Then the emergency signal came through. A coalition research colony on the nearby moon, under Vortai attack, 200 civilians, no defense force. The ship's main drive was offline, no way to get there in time except by shuttle. 1 functional shuttle. 8 humans. The moon colony was not built for war. It was a research outpost, white prefab buildings set into a shallow crater, surrounded by equipment arrays and sample storage units. The 200 people inside were scientists and technicians, Thelari and Feloni mostly, who spent their days measuring soil samples and cataloging atmospheric data. They had no weapons, no training, and a single emergency beacon they had activated the moment the vorti appeared over the crater rim. The vorti force was 60 units strong. Dara had heard the number on the shuttle ride down and had not said anything for a while. Then she had looked at her 7 people, Wren with his arm reslung, Briggs with tape around his ribs, the rest of them bandaged and tired in various ways, and she had started talking through the plan. They could not fight 60 in a straight line. 8 bodies against 60, even healthy ones, was a bad equation. But Dara had watched the vorti pull back from the engine corridor, not because they had been beaten, because they had lost their ability to predict what the humans would do next. That was the weapon, not firepower, not numbers, unpredictability. The vorti used models. Every species did. You build a model of your enemy, how they respond to pain, what they do when outnumbered, how fast they break, and you use that model to plan. The humans had broken every model the vorti had tried, and a force fighting without a working model was a force fighting blind. Dara intended to break their model again. She split the unit before they hit the crater. Wren took 2 others to the eastern perimeter, moving fast and loud, making noise, firing at wide angles, creating the impression of a larger force flanking from outside. Briggs took 2 more to the vorti supply line at the south edge, the chain of transport units that fed the ground force. Cut the supply line, and the enemy starts asking questions about the future. And Dara took the remaining 2 straight for the command node. Inside the colony, in a storage room with the lights off and 43 other people pressed in around her, a Thelari researcher named Asa had been still for 3 hours. She was a biologist. She studied microbial life in subsurface rock formations. She was not a brave person in any way she had ever defined that word. She was simply someone who had nowhere to go. She heard the sounds of the fight change about 20 minutes after the shuttle landed. The vorti had been organized, deliberate, systematic, moving through the outer sections of the colony in the kind of careful formation that said they were not hurrying because they did not need to. Then something changed. Distant shots from the east, widely spaced, suggesting flanks. An explosion at the south end that shook the floor and made everyone in the storage room grab each other. And then, confusing enough that Asa pressed her eye to the crack in the door to see. The nearest vorti unit stopped moving forward and turned around. Through the crack she saw a single human soldier moving down the colony's main interior corridor. He was not tall or particularly large. He had a burn on his left arm that was visible even from a distance. He was moving toward a group of 9 vorti who were repositioning toward him. Asa counted, she counted again, 1 and 9. She watched him take the first contact position and hold it. She watched the vorti fire. She watched him absorb a hit to the right side, step into a doorway, breathe, check the wound in a quick clinical way, and step back out. He did not run. He did not retreat to a safer distance. He held the corridor for 7 minutes, firing with the calm focus of someone doing something familiar, while from outside the sounds of the rest of the unit's chaos grew louder. 7 minutes was enough. Vorti Command Node, sitting in one of the outer buildings, received reports from 3 directions at once. A flanking force of unknown size from the east. Supply line destroyed. A unit stalled in the interior by a single combatant who had been hit twice and was still standing. The field commander ran his models. He ran them again. Nothing came back right. The data did not fit any pattern he had categories for. The humans were too few to be doing this much damage, but they were doing this much damage. They were injured but not stopping. They were in 3 places at once, and he could not find their center or their limit. He sent the retreat signal. Not because the colony was too hard to take. Because the force taking it had no shape he could understand, and a vorti commander who could not model his enemy had no business continuing the fight. The vorti pulled back over the crater rim and were gone. Dara gathered her unit at the colony entrance. 5 of the 8 had new injuries on top of old ones. Osei was sitting on the ground because standing hurt too much, but he was sitting upright, not lying down, and he was checking his weapon. Ren had fallen asleep against the wall, not dramatically, just tipped sideways and gone, the way very tired people go, like a machine finally switched off by something outside its own control. Priel had come on the shuttle. She stood in the doorway of the colony entrance and watched the humans from a distance. One of them was stitching his own arm with the focused patience of someone doing minor repair work. He was not making noise about it. He just worked the needle through, pulled the thread, and moved to the next stitch. 200 civilians were safe inside. Priel looked at her notes. Then she put her writing pad down and watched for a while. 2 days after the moon colony, Commander Voss sat alone in the debriefing room of the GCS Resolute and wrote his report. He wrote slowly. Voss was not a slow thinker. He was one of the fastest minds in the fleet, but this report required care. It was going to the Coalition High Council, and the Council would share it with the member species, and he needed the words to be right because what he was describing had no established language yet. He was not writing about a tactic or a strategy or a piece of equipment. He was writing about something he had watched and still did not fully understand, and honesty about that gap was the most useful thing he could offer. He read it back to himself before sending it. In the engagement at the Venn system border, the human unit under Sergeant Dara Knowles performed in a way that does not fit any category in Coalition combat records. They did not retreat when retreat was rational. They did not stop when stopping was possible. They did not break when breaking was expected. I reviewed their biometric data personally. They were not numb to pain. Their readings confirmed pain at or above normal levels for their species throughout the engagement. They were not artificially enhanced. There was no compulsion we could identify. They continued because they chose to continue, for reasons that do not appear to be fully translatable into biological terms. I do not have a tactical classification for this. I am recommending one be created. He sent it. Then he sat for a moment longer, looking at the empty table before getting up. The Coalition liaison arrived on a transport the next morning. His name was Fen Duval, and he was a Thelari administrator, precise and formal, with the slightly tired look of someone who attended too many debriefs. He had read Voss's report on the journey over. He called Dara into the room, sat across from her, and went through the questions in the order he had prepared them. He asked the same question Voss had asked in the engine corridor: what kept them going, what the mechanism was. Dara gave the same answer she had given before: the job, the people, the next thing that needed doing. Fen wrote this down without visible reaction and then pressed further, the way administrators do. When the mission ends, he said, how do you switch it off? The drive, the whatever it is, how do you turn it off? Dara thought about this. She did not answer quickly, which Fen seemed to appreciate. She was clearly trying to give him something true rather than something easy. You don't switch it off, she said. You just point it somewhere else, at rebuilding, at helping, at whatever needs doing next. Fen looked at her for a moment. You never actually stop. No, she said, we just change direction. Fen wrote that down. He looked at what he had written. Then he asked her something that was not on his prepared list, the kind of question that comes when something is bothering you and you finally admit it to yourself. Does it tire you? He asked, carrying that always moving, always pointed somewhere. Dara thought about this too. Yes, she said, but we're used to it. Fen nodded slowly and thanked her, and she left. He sat in the room for a while after, looking at his notes. Priel submitted her paper to the Coalition Institute of Xenobiology 3 weeks after the engagement. It was not the official report, that was Voss's, and it dealt in data and numbers and tactical recommendations. Priel's paper was something else. She had been asked by her supervisor to write up the observational data from the monitoring station, and she had done that. But she had also added a final section that her supervisor told her was unusual for a technical paper and that she should consider removing. She left it in. The final lines read, "Humans are not fearless, they are not unbreakable, they are not numb. They feel everything we feel, the pain registers, the fear chemistry is present and active, the exhaustion accumulates at rates similar to our own. They feel all of it, and then they continue anyway. I spent a long time trying to find the word for what this is. I do not think the word exists in any language I know. What I can say is this. The question is not what makes them dangerous in battle. The question is what happens when that same quality is pointed toward building and healing and protecting and repair. I believe we are very fortunate that it so often is." The paper was read widely, much more widely than Priel expected. Copies of it showed up on 17 coalition worlds within 2 months of publication. Voss sent her a message that said simply, "Well written." From Voss, that was significant. On the morning the Resolute was reassigned, Dara and Ren walked out of the debriefing building together. Ren still had his arm in a sling. Dara's ribs were still taped. The alien sun of the system they were stationed in was red and large and very different from anything either of them had grown up under, but they had stopped noticing that weeks ago. You get used to alien suns. Their new assignment was a relief convoy escort, medical supplies to 3 colony systems along the outer border. No combat expected. A long, quiet run. Ren looked at the ship in the distance. "Think it'll actually be quiet?" he asked. Dara did not answer. She kept walking. Ren smiled and fell into step beside her. They walked toward the ship in the red morning light, moving with the easy, unhurried purpose of people who had somewhere to be and were already on their way.